The conference room on the fourth floor of Paramount Studios smelled like cigarette smoke and expensive cologne. It was March 1976, and 12 of the most powerful people in Hollywood were seated around a mahogany table that had witnessed 100 deals, 1,000 arguments, and more broken dreams than anyone cared to count. Clint Eastwood sat near the end of the table, quiet as always, watching the room the way he watched everything. Observing, calculating, waiting. He wasn't supposed to be there. The meeting was about a different project, a crime drama that Paramount was developing. Clint had been invited as a courtesy because the studio wanted him for another film and thought this would be a good opportunity to discuss it informally. He'd agreed because saying no to these invitations sometimes cost you more than saying yes. But there was someone else in that room who hadn't expected to see Clint Eastwood. Someone who had very strong opinions about him. Someone who had never bothered to hide those opinions. Marlon Brando was sitting at the head of the table like a king holding court. He was 52 years old, 2 years removed from his legendary performance in The Godfather, and he carried himself with the absolute certainty of a man who knew he was the greatest actor of his generation. Maybe any generation. Brando had put on weight since his younger days, but his presence was still magnetic. When he spoke, people listened. When he moved, eyes followed. He had that thing that couldn't be taught or bought or faked. Star power, the real kind. The meeting had been going on for about 40 minutes. Scripts were discussed, budgets were debated. Names were thrown around for various roles. The usual Hollywood machinery grinding through its motions. Then someone mentioned Clint's name in connection with a potential project. The room fell silent, not because of the suggestion itself, but because of the sound Brando made. A small laugh. Dismissive. Cruel. "Eastwood?" Brando said, not even looking at Clint. "You want to put Eastwood in a serious drama?" The studio executive who'd made the suggestion shifted uncomfortably. "He's box office gold right now, Marlon. The Dirty Harry films, the westerns, he's not an actor." Brando cut him off, waving his hand like he was swatting away a fly. "He's a model who learned to hold a gun. There's a difference." 11 people in that room held their breath. The 12th, Clint Eastwood, didn't move, didn't react, just kept watching with those pale eyes that had intimidated 1,000 outlaws on screen. Brando still wasn't looking at him. That was the insult within the insult. He was talking about Clint as if Clint wasn't even there, as if he wasn't worth addressing directly. "I've seen his films," Brando continued, clearly enjoying the discomfort in the room. "All of them. The Italian westerns with Leone. The cop movies. You know what I see? I see a man standing in front of a camera looking tough. That's it. No transformation, no depth, no craft. He plays a Clint Eastwood in every single role, and somehow people call that acting." "Marlon," one of the producers said carefully, "maybe this isn't the time." "This is exactly the time." Brando finally turned to look at Clint. Their eyes met for the first time since the meeting began. "You're here. I'm here. Let's have an honest conversation about what acting actually is, because I don't think you know." The room was suffocating now. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't professional disagreement. This was Marlon Brando, the most respected actor in the world, publicly eviscerating Clint Eastwood in front of the people who controlled their careers. Clint still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. His face was completely neutral, that famous stoic expression that worked so well on screen. But behind those eyes, something was happening. Everyone could sense it. "Method acting," Brando said, leaning back in his chair. "Do you even know what that means? It means becoming someone else. It means losing yourself in the character so completely that you forget who you were before. It means suffering for your art. What do, Eastwood? You show up, hit your marks, squint at the camera, and cash your check. That's not acting. That's posing." Someone coughed nervously. A pen dropped. The clock on the wall ticked so loudly it sounded like gunshots. "I transformed myself for The Godfather," Brando continued. "I stuffed cotton in my cheeks. I studied real mobsters. I became Vito Corleone. When you watch that film, you don't see Marlon Brando. You see someone else entirely. That's the craft. That's the art." He pointed at Clint. "When people watch your films, they see you. Always you. The same face, the same voice, the same limited range. You're not an actor. You're a brand." 10 seconds of silence. That's what everyone would remember later. The 10 seconds of silence after Brando finished speaking. 10 seconds of Clint Eastwood sitting perfectly still, face unreadable, while the most powerful people in Hollywood waited to see what would happen. Some expected Clint to walk out. Others expected him to explode. A few thought he might just take the abuse and let the meeting continue. That's what most people would do when Marlon Brando attacked them. Just take it. What choice did you have? But Clint Eastwood wasn't most people. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and calm, almost gentle, the same voice he used in his films when things were about to get very, very bad for someone. "You finished?" 2 words, that's all. But the way he said them made Brando's smile falter for just a moment. "I'm just getting started," Brando replied, but some of the confidence had left his voice. Clint nodded slowly. "Good, because I've got something to say too." He leaned forward, placing his forearms on the table. Every eye in the room was locked on him now. Even the executives who'd been studying their notes were watching. "You want to talk about acting, Marlon?" "Let's talk about acting. You're right. I don't do what you do. I don't stuff cotton in my cheeks. I don't spend 6 months living in character. I don't make everyone on set call me by my character's name. You know why?" Brando opened his mouth to respond, but Clint kept going. "Because all of that is about you. Your process, your ego, your need to prove how serious you are about your craft. You spend so much time transforming yourself into other people because you can't stand being yourself. That's not art. That's hiding." The room had gone completely still. No one had ever talked to Marlon Brando like this. No one. "You want to know what I do?" Clint continued. "I show up. I know my lines. I hit my marks. I don't waste the crew's time with endless takes because I'm searching for emotional truth. I don't make 100 people wait while I find my motivation. I do my job, and I do it well, and I go home." "That's exactly my point," Brando interrupted. "You're a technician, not an artist. I'm not finished." The words cut through the air like a blade. Brando stopped talking. "You think because I don't suffer publicly, I don't feel anything? You think because I don't cry in interviews about how hard my childhood was, I don't understand pain? You think your way is the only way because it's the way they taught you in New York, in those acting classes where everyone sits around talking about Stanislavski and sense memory and emotional recall?" Clint shook his head slowly. "I learned to act in the real world, on television sets where we had to shoot 8 pages a day, on Italian film sets where the director didn't speak English and I had to figure out what he wanted through hand signals and instinct. I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing an actor can do is nothing. Just stand there. Let the audience come to you instead of reaching out and grabbing them by the throat." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was even quieter. "You want to know the difference between us, Marlon? You need the audience to see how hard you're working. You need them to watch your transformation and applaud your commitment. Me? I just want them to believe the story. I don't care if they see Clint Eastwood on screen. I care if they feel something. And judging by the box office, judging by the letters I get from regular people who were moved by my films, I'd say I'm doing something right." Brando's face had changed during this speech. The smug superiority was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like confusion, like a man who had never considered that there might be a different way of looking at things. "One more thing," Clint said. "You mentioned The Godfather. Great film, great performance. But I remember something else about that production. I remember you made Coppola's life hell. I remember you showed up late, forgot your lines, demanded cue cards taped all over the set. I remember the crew talking about how difficult you were, how every scene with you took 3 times as long as it should have." Clint leaned back in his chair. "My films come in under budget and ahead of schedule. Every single one. You know why? Because I respect the 100 people who show up every day to do their jobs. The grips, the gaffers, the makeup artists, the caterers. They're not there to witness my artistic journey. They're there to work. And when I waste their time with my process, I'm telling them their time doesn't matter. That my ego is more important than their families, their lives, their own dreams. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't tense. It was something else. Something like recognition. "You can call that being a technician," Clint said. "You can call it not being a real actor, but I'll tell you what I call it. I call it being a professional. And I'll take a professional over a genius who makes everyone around him miserable any day of the week." Marlon Brando, for the first time anyone could remember, had nothing to say. The meeting ended shortly after that. The energy in the room had shifted so dramatically that continuing felt pointless. People gathered their things and left quickly, avoiding eye contact, processing what they'd just witnessed. Clint was one of the first to leave. He didn't gloat, didn't even look at Brando on his way out, just nodded to the executives, grabbed his jacket, and walked out the door. But someone in that room was watching him go. Someone who had just had his entire worldview challenged in a way he hadn't expected. That night, Marlon Brando went home and did something he rarely did. He sat alone in his living room and thought about what Clint Eastwood had said. He thought about all the films he'd made, all the productions he'd disrupted, all the directors he'd frustrated, all the crew members who'd gone home exhausted because he needed one more take, one more moment, one more chance to find something that might not even have been there. He thought about the times he'd shown up unprepared, forcing others to compensate for his lack of discipline. The times he'd refused to memorize lines because he believed spontaneity was more important than reliability. The times he'd put his artistic process above everything and everyone else. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe he'd gotten something wrong. The story of that meeting spread through Hollywood within days. By the end of the week, everyone in the industry had heard some version of it. Marlon Brando called Clint Eastwood a fake actor. Clint destroyed him with a speech about professionalism and respect. The details varied depending on who was telling the story. Some said Clint had raised his voice. Others said he'd been ice-cold throughout. A few claimed Brando had apologized afterward, though no one could verify it. But everyone agreed on one thing. Clint Eastwood had stood up to the most intimidating actor in Hollywood and hadn't blinked. Years passed. Careers continued. Both men kept making films, kept winning awards, kept building legacies that would outlast them. They didn't speak again for almost 15 years. Then, in 1990, something unexpected happened. Clint Eastwood was preparing to direct a film called Unforgiven. It was a dark, revisionist Western that would ultimately win 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. But in 1990, it was just a script that Clint had been holding on to for years, waiting for the right time to make it. He got a phone call one evening. His assistant said it was Marlon Brando. Clint almost didn't take it. He hadn't thought about that meeting in years, and he had no interest in reopening old wounds. But something made him pick up the phone. "Clint." Brando's voice was older now, rougher. He was 66 years old and had been through a lifetime of tragedy and triumph since that day at Paramount. "I need to tell you something." "I'm listening." "That thing you said to me, about respecting the crew, about being a professional. I've thought about it every day since. Every single day." Clint didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. "You were right," Brando continued. "I spent my whole career believing that my talent entitled me to treat people however I wanted, that the art was all that mattered. But you showed me something that day. You showed me that how you make the art matters just as much as the art itself." There was a pause. Clint could hear Brando breathing on the other end of the line. "I was cruel to you in that meeting. I said things I knew would hurt because I wanted to prove I was better than you. But you didn't fight me on my terms. You didn't try to outact me or claim you were more talented. You just told me the truth about who I was and how I worked, and the truth was uglier than anything I'd ever admitted to myself." "Why are you calling me, Marlon?" "Because I heard you're making a Western." a real one, something that matters. And I wanted you to know that I think you're going to be great. Not as an actor, as a director, as a storyteller, as someone who knows how to treat people right and still make something beautiful." Clint felt something shift inside him, some old tension he hadn't even realized he was still carrying. "Thank you," he said. "One more thing." Brando's voice was quieter now. "That day in the meeting, when you said I transform myself because I can't stand being myself, you were right about that, too. I've spent my whole life running from who I am, hiding in characters because Marlon Brando never felt like enough. But you put yourself in every role, your actual self. And somehow that's braver than anything I've ever done." The call ended shortly after that. They never spoke again. When Marlon Brando died in 2004, Clint was asked for a comment. The press expected something generic, maybe even something bitter, given their famous confrontation. Instead, Clint said something that surprised everyone. Marlon Brando was the greatest actor of his generation. Maybe any generation. "We had our differences, but near the end of his life, he called me and said some things I'll never forget. He had the courage to question himself, to reconsider his beliefs, to admit he might have been wrong about some things. That's rare, especially for someone as successful as he was. I respected him for that. I still do." A reporter asked about the famous meeting at Paramount, about the confrontation, about what really happened. Clint smiled slightly. Two men disagreed about how to do their jobs. It happens every day in every industry. The difference is, we both learned something from it. At least, I hope we did. I know I learned that even the greatest can doubt themselves. And Marlon learned that there's more than one way to tell the truth on screen. "What's the most important thing you took from that experience?" Clint thought about it for a long moment. "That being right isn't the same as being kind. I said some harsh things in that meeting. True things, but harsh. If I could do it again, I'd find a gentler way to say them. Because Marlon wasn't trying to hurt me. Not really. He was defending something he believed in. The same way I was. We were both just trying to protect our idea of what it means to make something meaningful." The reporter pressed further. "Do you think he ever really changed, after what you said to him?" "I don't know. I hope so. But here's what I do know. He called me 15 years later to tell me I was right. That took guts. More guts than anything he ever did on screen. Because admitting you were wrong, truly admitting it, that's the hardest performance of all." Unforgiven was released in 1992. It won 4 Academy Awards. Clint dedicated it to 2 directors who had shaped his career, Sergio Leone and Don Siegel. But in a private moment at the ceremony, when asked about his journey from television actor to Oscar-winning director, Clint mentioned someone else. "There was a meeting once," he said, "a long time ago. Someone told me I wasn't a real actor. It made me angry. But it also made me think about what I actually believed, about what I was trying to do. Sometimes your harshest critics give you the greatest gifts. They force you to know yourself." He didn't mention Brando by name. He didn't have to. Everyone who knew the story understood. That's the truth about Clint Eastwood and Marlon Brando. Not enemies, not friends. Something more complicated. 2 men who represented different philosophies of the same craft, who clashed in a conference room and spent the rest of their lives processing what that clash revealed about themselves. Brando believed acting was transformation, becoming someone else entirely, losing yourself in the character. Clint believed acting was truth, bringing your authentic self to every role, letting the audience see something real. Neither was wrong, neither was right. They were just different. And maybe that's the lesson. In art, in work, in life. There's no single path to greatness. No one method that works for everyone. The only thing that matters is finding your own truth and having the courage to defend it. Even when Marlon Brando's telling you you're wrong. Even when the whole room is watching. Even when 10 seconds of silence feel like a lifetime. Clint Eastwood found his truth that day. and he never let go of it. That's what legends are made of. Not talent alone, not success alone, but the moments when everything you believe is challenged and you discover what you're actually made of. March 1976. A conference room at Paramount. 12 people witnessed something they'd never forget. Marlon Brando called Clint Eastwood a fake, and Clint Eastwood showed him what real looks like.